You walk into your favorite restaurant expecting a normal evening out. Instead, you witness something that makes your blood boil. Staff members are laughing as they dump an entire soda over a black woman's head, treating her like she's nothing more than entertainment. The woman sits there, humiliated, sticky liquid dripping down her face and clothes, while employees high-five each other like they've just pulled off the prank of the century. What would you do? Would you speak up? Walk away? Call the police? Now imagine you're not just any customer. You're the person who owns this place. And the woman they just humiliated? She's the love of your life. Your wife. The mother of your children. This isn't just a story about racism in restaurants. This isn't just another tale of workplace bullying gone too far. This is the true story of Marcus and Diana Chen, and the 60 seconds that turned their world upside down, exposed the ugly truth about people they trusted, and ultimately led to the most powerful act of justice you've ever heard. What happened next will restore your faith in standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything you've worked for. But first, let's go back to where it all began. Diana Chen never imagined she would fall in love with a man she met while arguing about pizza toppings. It was a Tuesday evening in downtown Portland, and she had just finished her shift at the community health clinic where she worked as a nurse. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair was escaping from its ponytail, and all she wanted was a simple margarita pizza to take home. The problem was the teenage cashier at Marco's Pizza who insisted that pineapple belonged on every pizza, including hers. Diana was politely but firmly explaining that she absolutely did not want fruit on her cheese and tomato creation, when a voice behind her chuckled. You know, I think the lady knows what she wants on her own pizza. Diana turned around to see a tall man with kind eyes and flour dusted on his apron. His name tag read, Marcus, owner. And he had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were talking to an old friend. I'm so sorry about Jake here, Marcus said, gently moving his employee aside. He's new and thinks he's a pizza evangelist. One margarita, coming right up. On the house, for the trouble. Diana studied his face, looking for the usual signs of someone just trying to smooth over a situation. Instead, she saw genuine concern and what looked like embarrassment that his staff had hassled the customer. You don't have to do that, she said. I want to, Marcus replied. Besides, anyone who knows exactly what they want and isn't afraid to say it deserves respect, not a lecture about pineapple. That was 18 months ago. Now Diana Chen Rodriguez was Diana Chen Rodriguez Martinelli, though she mostly just went by Diana Chen because explaining her hyphenated married name took longer than most people had patience for. She and Marcus had been married for 6 months, and she was still getting used to the idea that she was married to a restaurant owner. Marcus had inherited Marco's Pizza from his uncle, who had named it after himself but always insisted the food was more important than the branding. The place wasn't fancy. Red checkered tablecloths, mismatched chairs, and walls covered with photos of customers celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, and graduation parties. But the pizza was incredible. The calzones were legendary in the neighborhood, and Marcus treated his staff like family. That last part Diana was beginning to realize might be a problem. She had started noticing things over the past few months. Little comments from certain staff members when Marcus wasn't around. The way some of them would stop talking when she entered the kitchen. How her suggestions about the menu or the restaurant's community outreach were met with blank stares or polite nods that clearly meant, thanks but no thanks. At first, Diana thought it was just the natural adjustment period of being the boss's wife. She understood that dynamic was complicated. She had made it clear to Marcus from the beginning that she didn't want special treatment, didn't want to be seen as someone who got perks just because of who she married. She kept her day job at the clinic, paid for her own meals when she ate at the restaurant, and tried to stay out of business decisions. But lately, the feeling had been growing stronger that something was off. There was an edge to some of the interactions that went beyond normal workplace awkwardness. Take Jennifer, for instance. Jennifer had been working at Marco's for 3 years, since she was in high school. She was now 21, studying business at Portland State, and Marcus had been mentoring her with an eye toward potentially making her a manager someday. Jennifer was smart, organized, and great with customers. She was also one of the employees who seemed to have a problem with Diana that went beyond typical adjustment issues. Last week, Diana had come in for lunch during her break from the clinic. She ordered her usual, a small margarita and a side salad, and sat at the counter to eat quickly before heading back to work. Jennifer was working the register, and when Diana's order came up, Jennifer had called out loudly, "Free lunch for the owner's wife." The comment wasn't technically wrong, but the way Jennifer said it, with a slight emphasis on free and a look around the dining room to make sure other customers heard, felt deliberately provocative. Diana had quietly pulled out her wallet and left money for the meal plus tip on the counter, but the damage was done. She could feel other customers looking at her with the kind of judgment that comes when people think you're getting something you don't deserve. When she mentioned the incident to Marcus that evening, he was genuinely shocked. Jennifer said that, "Are you sure you didn't misunderstand her tone?" Diana had learned to recognize this response from her husband. Marcus was one of those people who genuinely couldn't imagine that someone would be deliberately unkind, especially not someone he cared about and trusted. It was one of the things she loved about him, but it was also one of the things that worried her. "I'm sure," Diana had said gently. "And Marcus, I don't think this is the first time something like this has happened. I think there might be some issues with how some of your staff feel about me." Marcus had promised to keep an eye on things, but Diana could tell he didn't really believe there was a serious problem. In his mind, his employees were good people who might just need time to adjust to having the owner's wife around more often. He couldn't imagine that the issue might be more complicated than that. The truth was, Diana had been dealing with variations of this her whole life. As a black woman, in predominantly white spaces, she had developed a sixth sense for recognizing when someone's discomfort with her presence went beyond normal social awkwardness. She had learned to distinguish between the innocent clumsiness of people who simply hadn't spent much time around people who looked like her, and the more pointed discomfort of people who had decided she didn't belong. The difference was usually in the details. The way someone would make eye contact with everyone in a group except her, the way her contributions to conversations would be ignored or glossed over, the way people would be just a little too slow to include her in group activities, or just a little too quick to assume she couldn't afford something or didn't understand something. At Marco's, Diana was starting to recognize some of these patterns, but they were complicated by the fact that she was also the owner's wife. Was Jennifer's comment about the free lunch rooted in resentment about Diana's race, or resentment about her relationship with Marcus, or just general workplace drama? Was the way some employees seemed to dismiss her suggestions about community outreach based on racism, or just typical resistance to outside input? Diana had learned over the years that pointing out these dynamics was often more trouble than it was worth, especially when she couldn't prove her suspicions. People would accuse her of being overly sensitive, of seeing racism when none existed, of making everything about race. It was easier, usually, to just navigate around the problem and focus on the people and places where she felt genuinely welcome. But this was different. This was her husband's business, a place she was going to be connected to for the rest of their marriage. These weren't strangers she could avoid, or acquaintances she could keep at arm's length. These were people Marcus trusted, people he considered family, people whose opinions mattered to him. More importantly, Diana was beginning to suspect that the problem wasn't just about her. If some of Marcus's employees had issues with black people that they were keeping hidden from him, that was a problem that went beyond her personal comfort. Marcos served a diverse neighborhood, and Marcus prided himself on creating a welcoming space for everyone. If his staff didn't share those values, customers would eventually notice. Diana decided to give it more time, to try to document specific incidents so she could present Marcus with concrete examples rather than just a general feeling. She also decided to make more of an effort to build relationships with the staff members who did seem genuinely welcoming. Like Carlos, the head cook, and Maria, who worked weekend shifts. What Diana didn't know was that some of the employees had been talking about her when she wasn't around. Not all of them, but a core group that included Jennifer, a server named Brad who had been at the restaurant for 2 years, and Jake, the cashier, who had tried to put pineapple on her pizza that first night. Their conversation started innocently enough. Comments about how Diana seemed to think she was better than everyone else because she was married to the boss. Observations that she was standoffish and didn't seem to want to be friends with the staff. Speculation about whether she was only interested in Marcus for his money, even though the restaurant was hardly making anyone rich. But gradually the conversations had taken on a different tone. Comments about how Diana was playing the race card when she made suggestions about community outreach to local organizations. Jokes about how she probably only ate at fancy places before she met Marcus. References to her hair, her clothes, the way she talked that had undertones Diana would have recognized immediately if she had heard them. The group had developed their own way of talking about Diana that felt like harmless venting to them, but was actually a way of reinforcing their shared belief that she didn't really belong at Marco's. They told themselves they would never do anything to actually hurt her feelings, that they were just blowing off steam about a complicated situation, that they were also feeding each other's resentments and prejudices in a way that was building towards something more serious than they realized. Group dynamics have a way of amplifying individual biases, And what started as minor complaints was slowly turning into something uglier. Marcus, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to these undercurrents. He saw his staff being polite to Diana when he was around, and he trusted them to extend that same politeness when he wasn't there. He had built his management style around treating his employees like family, which meant giving them the benefit of the doubt and assuming good intentions even when problems arose. This approach had served him well in most situations. His staff turnover was low, his employees genuinely cared about the restaurant's success, and customers often commented on how friendly and welcoming the atmosphere was. But it also meant that Marcus sometimes missed warning signs that a more skeptical manager might have caught. Diana, for her part, was trying to balance her growing concerns with her love for her husband and her respect for his business. She didn't want to be the wife who caused drama in the workplace, but she also didn't want to ignore something that could become a bigger problem down the road. She decided to start keeping a small notebook where she would record specific incidents, not just her impressions, but exact words and actions she could point to if she needed to have a more serious conversation with Marcus. She also decided to make one more genuine effort to build better relationships with the staff members she was having trouble with. What Diana couldn't have predicted was that this effort to be more present and engaged at the restaurant would put her directly in the path of the incident that would change everything. Sometimes the very act of trying to solve a problem is what leads you to discover just how serious that problem really is. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would force everyone involved to show their true colors, and the results would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The first real warning sign came on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Diana had taken the day off from the clinic for a medical appointment and decided to stop by Marco's afterward for a late lunch. She usually avoided coming in during busy periods, not wanting to distract Marcus from his work, but the lunch rush had died down, and she thought it might be a good opportunity to chat with some of the staff during their quieter moments. When Diana walked in, she found Jennifer, Brad, and Jake clustered around the counter, talking in low voices, while they cleaned and restocked for the dinner shift. They looked up when she entered, and Diana noticed a strange moment where they all seemed to freeze before quickly resuming their tasks. "Hi, everyone," Diana said cheerfully. "Slow afternoon?" "Pretty much," Jennifer replied without looking up from the register she was counting. "Marcus is in the back doing inventory." Diana nodded and headed toward the kitchen to say hello to her husband. But as she passed the counter, she caught a fragment of conversation that made her pause. "Just saying, some people think they can just walk in anywhere like they own the place." The words were spoken quietly by Brad, apparently continuing whatever conversation they had been having before she arrived. Diana wasn't completely certain he was talking about her, but the timing and the way the group fell silent when they realized she might have heard made her stomach tighten with a familiar dread. She continued toward the kitchen, but found herself listening more carefully to the sounds from the front of the restaurant. Over the next few minutes, she heard muffled laughter and what sounded like whispered commentary, though she couldn't make out specific words. When Marcus emerged from the storage room with his clipboard and calculator, Diana was sitting at the small desk in the corner where he did paperwork, trying to look casual while fighting the urge to tell him exactly what she suspected was happening. "Hey, beautiful," Marcus said, kissing the top of her head. "How did the appointment go?" "Fine," Diana replied. "Everything looks good. I thought I'd grab some food before heading home. Let me make you something special," Marcus said, already heading toward the prep area. "How about that white sauce pizza with the roasted vegetables you liked last time?" As Marcus started pulling ingredients from the walk-in cooler, Diana could hear the conversation from the front getting slightly louder. Not loud enough for Marcus to notice over the sound of the industrial refrigerator and his own movement around the kitchen, but loud enough for her to catch occasional words and phrases. "Always hanging around. What does she even do here? Marcus doesn't see it, but..." Diana felt her chest tighten. She had hoped she was being paranoid, but this was starting to sound like exactly the kind of conversation she had been afraid was happening behind her back. The dilemma was what to do about it. If she said something to Marcus right now, he would probably go out and ask his staff what they had been discussing, and they would either deny saying anything problematic or claim they had been talking about someone else entirely. Diana would look like she was being oversensitive or trying to cause trouble. But if she didn't say anything, the behavior would likely continue and possibly escalate. Diana had seen this pattern before in other workplaces. Small groups of employees who felt comfortable expressing prejudiced views to each other often grew bolder over time, especially if they believed management was oblivious to their behavior. Diana decided to try a different approach. Instead of confronting the problem directly, she would make herself more present at the restaurant and try to build genuine relationships with individual staff members. If she could connect with them as people, maybe the group dynamic that seemed to be developing would naturally dissolve. Over the next several weeks, Diana started coming by Marco's more often. She would stop in during quiet periods and make conversation with whoever was working. She asked Carlos about his family and learned that his daughter was applying to nursing school. She helped Maria practice her English by reading through some of her community college assignments with her. She even tried to find common ground with Jennifer by asking about her business classes and offering to share some of the management techniques she had learned in her healthcare work. The strategy worked with some of the staff. Carlos started greeting her warmly and would often ask her opinion about new recipe ideas. Maria began saving her homework questions for when Diana was around, and their conversations evolved into genuine friendship. But with the core group of Jennifer, Brad, and Jake, Diana's increased presence seemed to have the opposite effect. Instead of warming up to her, they seemed to become more resentful of what they perceived as her intrusion into their workplace dynamic. The comments became more frequent and less subtle. When Diana suggested that Marcos could partner with the community health clinic for a fundraiser, Brad loudly wondered why they needed to get involved with charity cases when they had their own bills to pay. When she complimented the new fall decorations, Jake muttered something about how some people had opinions about everything. Most troubling to Diana was the way Jennifer had started treating interactions with her like performances for the benefit of other staff members. When Marcus was around, Jennifer was professionally polite, but when he stepped away, she would make comments clearly designed to get reactions from her co-workers. "Oh, Diana, you're here again," Jennifer would say with exaggerated surprise when Diana came in for lunch. "Don't you have a job to get to?" Or, "Diana, since you're always here anyway, maybe you should just start taking shifts. We could use the help and it's not like you're doing anything else." The comments were always delivered with just enough of a smile that Jennifer could claim she was joking if anyone called her out. But the underlying message was clear. Diana didn't belong there, and her presence was unwelcome. Marcus remained oblivious to these dynamics. When he was present, his staff behaved professionally, and Diana was reluctant to burden him with what felt like minor interpersonal drama when he was already stressed about running the business. But the situation was taking a toll on Diana. She found herself dreading visits to the restaurant, analyzing every interaction for hidden meanings, second-guessing her own perceptions of what was happening. She started making excuses to avoid stopping by Marco's, which meant seeing less of Marcus during his long workdays. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening in early December. Diana had spent the weekend working extra shifts at the clinic to cover for a colleague who was out sick, and she was exhausted. All she wanted was to pick up some food from Marco's and spend a quiet evening at home with Marcus. When she arrived at the restaurant, she found it unusually busy for a Sunday. A family celebration was taking up most of the dining room, and there was a steady stream of takeout orders from customers trying to beat the cold rain that had been falling all day. Marcus was juggling orders in the kitchen while Jennifer and Brad handled the front of the house. Diana could see that they were understaffed and stressed, so she decided to help out without being asked. She started clearing and wiping down tables that had been vacated, refilling water glasses, and generally trying to be useful. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. The extra help was clearly appreciated, and Diana felt like she was finally finding a way to contribute to the restaurant's success without stepping on anyone's toes. Then she overheard Jennifer talking to Brad near the register, apparently thinking the noise from the busy dining room would cover their conversation. "Look at her playing restaurant worker," Jennifer said, loud enough for several customers to hear. "Does she think she actually works here?" Brad laughed and replied, "Maybe she's auditioning for a real job. Must be nice not having to worry about money when your husband owns the place." Diana felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. She was tired, she was trying to help, and she was being mocked for her efforts by employees who apparently had no problem disrespecting her in front of paying customers. But what happened next was worse than the comments themselves. An elderly woman at a nearby table had clearly heard Jennifer and Brad's exchange, and she turned to look at Diana with the kind of expression people get when they're witnessing something uncomfortable and don't know whether to intervene. "Excuse me," the woman said quietly to Diana. "Are you all right, dear?" The simple kindness of the question, combined with the recognition that the situation had become so obvious that customers were noticing, finally broke through Diana's efforts to handle the problem diplomatically. Diana smiled at the woman and assured her that everything was fine, but inside, she was making a decision. She couldn't continue to pretend that this was just normal workplace tension, or that her concerns were unfounded. The behavior was escalating. It was affecting customers' experience at the restaurant, and it was time for Marcus to know exactly what was happening. After the dinner rush died down and the last customers had left, Diana asked Marcus if they could talk privately in his office. She had mentally rehearsed what she wanted to say, trying to stick to specific facts rather than general impressions. "Marcus," she began, "I need to tell you about some things that have been happening with certain staff members, and I need you to really listen to what I'm saying." Marcus put down the receipts he had been counting and gave her his full attention. "Of course. What's going on?" Diana took a deep breath and began recounting specific incidents from the past several weeks. She told him about the comments she had overheard, the way certain employees' behavior changed when he wasn't around, and tonight's exchange between Jennifer and Brad. As she talked, she watched Marcus's expression shift from confusion to concern to something that looked like disbelief. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Diana," he said finally, "I'm not saying you're wrong about what you heard, but isn't it possible that you might be misinterpreting some of these interactions? Jennifer and Brad are good kids, and they've been with me for years. I have a hard time believing they would deliberately try to make you feel unwelcome." Diana had expected this response, but it still stung. "Marcus, I'm not misinterpreting anything. I'm telling you exactly what happened."
"I know you are," Marcus said, reaching for her hand.
"And I believe that you heard what you heard. But sometimes when people are feeling sensitive about something, they can read meanings into comments that weren't necessarily intended." The word sensitive hit Diana like a slap. It was the word people always used to dismiss her concerns about discrimination, the implication that the problem was her perception rather than other people's behavior. "I am not being overly sensitive," Diana said, pulling her hand away. "I am telling you that some of your employees are treating me disrespectfully, and it's getting worse. Tonight they were talking about me in front of customers, Marcus. That's not sensitivity, that's a problem." Marcus looked genuinely troubled, but Diana could see that he was still struggling to accept that people he trusted could behave the way she was describing. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll talk to them. I'll make it clear that everyone needs to treat you with respect, and if there have been any misunderstandings, we'll clear them up." Diana felt a mixture of relief and frustration. She was glad that Marcus was finally taking her concerns seriously, but she worried that his approach would be too gentle to actually solve the problem. What neither Diana nor Marcus realized was that their conversation was about to become irrelevant. The dynamics that had been building at Marco's Pizza were approaching a tipping point, and the incident that would force everything into the open was less than a week away. Jennifer, Brad, and Jake had grown comfortable in their shared resentment of Diana, and they had convinced themselves that their behavior was justified. They saw her as an outsider who was trying to change their workplace dynamic, and they felt like they were defending their territory. But group behavior has a way of escalating beyond what any individual member would do on their own. What started as whispered comments and eye rolls was about to become something much more serious, and the consequences would be more severe than anyone involved could have imagined. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the true extent of the problem Diana had been trying to address, and the results would change everything for everyone involved. The Tuesday that changed everything started like any other day. Diana had worked an early shift at the clinic, helping process a group of patients who needed routine blood work before the clinic got busy with walk-ins and appointments. By 11:30, she was finished and found herself with an unexpected free afternoon. She decided to surprise Marcus by stopping by the restaurant with lunch from the Thai place down the street that he loved but never had time to visit during work hours. It was the kind of thoughtful gesture that had become part of their marriage rhythm, small ways of taking care of each other despite their busy schedules. Diana picked up Marcus's favorite pad thai and spring rolls, then drove to Marco's Pizza. When she pulled into the small parking lot behind the restaurant, she noticed that Marcus's car wasn't there. She checked her phone and saw a text message that must have arrived while she was driving. "Had to run to restaurant supply store, back by 1 o'clock. Love you." Diana sat in her car for a moment, debating whether to leave the food with the staff or just take it home and surprise Marcus later. She decided to go ahead and drop it off, figuring someone could put it in the refrigerator until Marcus returned. When Diana walked through the back entrance that led directly into the kitchen, she expected to find Carlos or one of the other cooks preparing for the lunch rush. Instead, she found the kitchen empty except for prep work that had been partially completed and abandoned. She could hear voices and laughter coming from the dining area, which was unusual for this time of day, when the staff was normally focused on getting ready for the busy lunch period. Diana set the Thai food containers on the stainless steel prep counter and walked toward the front of the restaurant to find someone who could make sure Marcus got his lunch. What she found when she reached the dining room stopped her in her tracks. Jennifer, Brad, and Jake were clustered around one of the tables with their phones out, apparently making videos of each other. The restaurant was officially closed for another 30 minutes before lunch service began, so there were no customers present. The 3 employees had clearly been goofing around, and from the energy in the room, Diana could tell they had been building up to something for a while. "Oh, perfect," Jennifer said when she spotted Diana. Her tone was different than Diana had ever heard before, not the fake politeness she usually maintained, but something harder and more openly hostile. "Look who decided to show up." Diana felt immediately that something was wrong. The atmosphere in the room was charged in a way that made her instincts scream danger, but she couldn't put her finger on exactly what was happening.
I just came to drop off lunch for Marcus, Diana said carefully.
"I didn't know he wasn't here." "Of course you didn't," Brad said, moving to block the path between Diana and the front door. "You just show up whenever you want, right? Like you own the place." Jake was fidgeting with his phone, and Diana realized he was recording. "Guys, what are you doing?" she asked, genuine confusion mixing with growing alarm. "We're just having some fun," Jennifer said, picking up a large plastic cup that was sitting on the table. Diana could see that it was filled with dark soda, probably Coke or Dr. Pepper. "You know what fun is, right, Diana? Or are you too good for that kind of thing?" Diana's nursing training kicked in, and she found herself automatically assessing the situation like a medical emergency. 3 people, all younger and stronger than her, blocking her exit routes. 1 person recording on a phone. Aggressive body language and speech patterns that suggested escalating hostility. A cup of liquid being held in a way that suggested it might be used as a weapon. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," Diana said, keeping her voice calm and non-threatening. "I'm just going to go wait in the car until Marcus gets back." She started to move toward the door, but Brad stepped directly into her path. "Actually, I don't think you should go anywhere yet," he said. "We've been wanting to talk to you." Diana's heart was beating fast, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had dealt with agitated patients and family members in medical settings, and she knew that panicking would only make the situation worse. "Okay," she said. "What did you want to talk about?" Jennifer laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "We want to talk about how you think you can just waltz in here and act like you belong. How you think you can tell us what to do and how to run this place."
I've never told any of you what to do, Diana said truthfully.
"I've never tried to interfere with how you do your jobs." "Right," Jake said from behind his phone camera. "You just make suggestions about community outreach and fundraisers and all that other stuff. Like we asked for your opinion." Diana realized that her attempts to build relationships with the staff had been completely misinterpreted. What she had thought were friendly conversations and helpful suggestions, they had seen as interference and condescension. "If my suggestions seemed inappropriate, I apologize," Diana said. "I was just trying to be friendly and helpful." "Helpful?" Brad repeated mockingly. "Yeah, that's what we need. Help from someone who doesn't even work here." Jennifer had been slowly rotating the cup in her hands while the conversation continued, and Diana suddenly understood what was about to happen. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were planning to dump the soda on her, and Jake was going to record it for social media. "Please don't do this," Diana said, looking directly at Jennifer. "Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the way to make it." "Oh, now you want to tell us what to do again," Jennifer said. "See, guys, I told you she thinks she's in charge here." Diana tried one more time to de-escalate. "Jennifer, you're a smart person. You're studying business. You know that doing something like this could get you in serious trouble. It's not worth it." For just a moment, Diana thought she saw uncertainty flicker across Jennifer's face, but then Brad spoke up from behind her. "Come on, Jen, don't let her punk out of this. She needs to learn that she can't just show up here acting like she owns us." The peer pressure in that moment was visible. Diana watched Jennifer's expression harden as she made the decision to go through with whatever they had planned. "You know what, Diana?" Jennifer said, raising the cup. "Maybe you need to cool off." Diana had worked in emergency medicine long enough to know that some situations can't be talked out of, only survived. She braced herself and tried to turn away to protect her face, but Jennifer was too close and too quick. The soda hit Diana square in the face and chest, drenching her hair and soaking through her shirt and jacket. The liquid was cold and sticky, and the force of it made her gasp and stumble backward. She could taste the artificial sweetness in her mouth and feel it dripping down her neck. For a moment, the dining room was completely silent, except for the sound of liquid dripping onto the floor. Diana stood there, stunned not just by the physical shock of being doused with soda, but by the reality of what had just happened. These were people Marcus trusted, people he considered family, and they had just humiliated her for sport. Then the laughter started. Brad was the first to crack up. followed quickly by Jake, who was still recording. Jennifer seemed surprised by what she had done, but when her co-worker started laughing, she joined in. "Oh my God, did you see her face?" Brad gasped between laughs. "This is going to get so many views," Jake said, staring at his phone screen. "Welcome to Marco's Pizza, Diana," Jennifer said with mock formality. "Can I get you anything else today?" Diana felt a rage building inside her that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Not just anger at what had been done to her, but fury at the casual cruelty of it, the way they were treating her humiliation as entertainment. She thought about all the times she had tried to be understanding, all the excuses she had made for their behavior, all the ways she had tried to build bridges with people who apparently saw her as less than human. But she also knew that reacting with anger would only give them more ammunition to use against her. Instead, Diana pulled out her own phone and started recording. "Could you repeat what you just said, Jennifer?" Diana said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the soda still dripping from her hair. The laughter stopped abruptly as the three employees realized that Diana was now recording them. The power dynamic in the room shifted as they suddenly understood that their prank was being documented by someone who definitely wouldn't be posting it for laughs. "Turn that off," Brad said, no longer laughing. "Why?" Diana asked, still recording. "I thought this was funny. Jake certainly thought it was worth recording." Jennifer's face had gone pale. "Diana, look, we were just joking around. It wasn't personal." "Really?" Diana said, zooming in on the puddle of soda at her feet. "What part of throwing a drink at someone isn't personal?" Jake had stopped recording and was frantically tapping at his phone, probably trying to delete the video he had just taken. "This is stupid," he muttered. "Why does everything have to be such a big deal with you?" Diana looked at the three people who had just humiliated her and realized that they still didn't understand the gravity of what they had done. In their minds, this was just a prank that had gotten a little out of hand, not a serious act of workplace harassment and potentially assault. "You know what?" Diana said, lowering her phone. "I'm going to go clean myself up, and then I'm going to wait for my husband to come back so I can tell him exactly what happened here today." She turned toward the bathroom, then paused and looked back at them. "And all of you better hope that Marcus is more understanding about this than I am." As Diana walked toward the bathroom, she could hear frantic whispered conversation behind her. She caught fragments. "Maybe we should call Marcus, and she's going to try to get us fired, and why did you have to film it?" In the bathroom, Diana looked at herself in the mirror and almost started crying. Her hair was plastered to her head with sticky soda, her makeup was running, and her clothes were soaked through. But more than the physical mess, she was devastated by the emotional reality of what had just happened. She had tried so hard to fit in, to be accepted, to build relationships with these people. And they had responded by literally throwing drinks at her for entertainment. Diana used paper towels to clean off as much of the soda as she could, but she was going to need a complete change of clothes and a shower before she felt human again. More importantly, she needed to decide how to handle what had just happened. She could hear movement in the dining room as Jennifer, Brad, and Jake apparently tried to clean up the mess and figure out how to explain the situation when Marcus returned. Diana suspected they were going to try to minimize what had happened, maybe even claim it was an accident, but Diana had it all on video. She had their faces, their voices, and clear evidence of what they had done. For the first time since she had started having problems of Marco's, she had undeniable proof that her concerns were justified. The question now was what Marcus would do with that proof. Diana knew her husband was a good man who loved her, but she also knew he had deep loyalty to his employees and a strong belief in giving people second chances. What Diana didn't know was that Marcus was about to walk through the front door of his restaurant and see his wife standing there soaked in soda, with three of his most trusted employees looking guilty as hell, and he was going to have to decide which side of his heart to follow. The moment that would define their marriage, their business, and their understanding of who they could trust was less than 5 minutes away. Marcus Chen Rodriguez pushed through the front door of Marco's Pizza, carrying 2 heavy cases of ingredients from the restaurant supply store, already mentally planning how to prep for what looked like it would be a busy lunch service, based on the weather forecast. He was thinking about the new winter soup special he wanted to try, and whether they had enough of the good bread rolls that customers always complained about when they ran out. He was not thinking about walking into a crime scene. The first thing Marcus noticed was the silence. At 12:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, the restaurant should have been buzzing with lunch prep activity. Instead, the dining room was eerily quiet except for what sounded like hushed, urgent conversation coming from near the kitchen. The second thing he noticed was the smell. Sticky, sweet, and artificial. Like someone had spilled a massive amount of soda and hadn't cleaned it up properly. The third thing he noticed was his wife standing near the bathroom door, soaking wet and looking like she had been through a trauma. Marcus dropped the supply cases with a crash that echoed through the empty dining room. "Diana? What happened? Are you okay?" Before Diana could answer, Jennifer appeared from behind the counter where she had apparently been hiding. Her face was flushed and she looked like she had been crying. "Marcus, thank God you're back," Jennifer said, rushing toward him. "There was an accident. Diana slipped and fell into a table with drinks on it. We were trying to help her clean up." Marcus looked from Jennifer to his wife, who was staring at Jennifer with an expression of complete disbelief. "Diana slipped?" "That's not what happened," Diana said quietly, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that Marcus had never heard before. "That's not what happened at all." Brad and Jake emerged from the kitchen area, both looking guilty and avoiding eye contact. Marcus's stomach began to drop as he realized that whatever had occurred here was much more serious than a simple accident. "Okay," Marcus said slowly, setting down his keys and jacket. "Someone needs to tell me exactly what happened here. Right now." Jennifer opened her mouth to speak first, but Diana held up her hand. "Marcus, before anyone says anything else, I need you to see something." Diana pulled out her phone and held it toward Marcus. "I recorded part of what happened. I want you to watch this before you hear anyone's version of events." Marcus took the phone with hands that were starting to shake slightly. He had never seen his wife look the way she looked right now. Not angry exactly, but something deeper and more dangerous than anger. He pressed play on the video. The recording was short but devastating. Marcus watched his wife standing in his restaurant dripping with soda, while Jennifer, Brad, and Jake laughed at her humiliation. He heard Jennifer's mocking tone as she welcomed Diana to Marco's Pizza and asked if she could get her anything else. He saw the puddle of liquid on his floor and the looks of cruel satisfaction on the faces of employees he had trusted and cared about. When the video ended, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The silence in the restaurant was complete except for the sound of his own breathing and what might have been Jennifer starting to cry. Finally, Marcus looked up at the three employees who were clustered together near the counter like they were waiting for sentencing. "Jennifer," he said, his voice calm in a way that somehow made the words more terrifying than if he had been shouting. "Did you throw a drink at my wife?" Jennifer's composure finally cracked completely. "Marcus, it wasn't like that. We were just joking around. It got out of hand. We didn't mean to hurt her feelings." "Did you throw a drink at my wife?" Marcus repeated, each word precisely enunciated. "Yes," Jennifer whispered. "But Marcus, you have to understand. Did you record it?" Marcus asked, turning to Jake. Jake nodded miserably, still clutching his phone like it might somehow save him. "And did you block her from leaving?" Marcus asked Brad. Brad started to deny it, then seemed to realize there was no point. "We just wanted to talk to her." Marcus walked over to Diana, who had been watching this exchange in silence. Up close, he could see that her hair was still sticky with soda, her makeup was streaked, and her clothes were soaked through. More importantly, he could see something in her eyes that looked like relief mixed with devastation. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently, reaching out to touch her face. "Not physically," Diana replied. "But Marcus, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. It's been building up for months." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and Diana could see him processing not just what had happened today, but all the conversations they had had about her concerns. All the times she had tried to tell him something was wrong. All the moments when he had chosen to believe the best about his employees rather than trust his wife's instincts. When he opened his eyes again, Marcus looked at Diana with an expression that contained apology, love, and a determination she had never seen before. "I should have listened to you," he said simply. "I should have believed you from the beginning." Then Marcus turned to face his employees, and the man who had built his management style around treating staff like family was gone. In his place was someone Diana had never seen before. Someone who was capable of actions that would have consequences. "Jennifer, Brad, Jake," Marcus said, "you're fired. All three of you. Effective immediately." "Marcus, wait," Jennifer said, stepping forward with her hands extended like she was trying to physically stop his words. "You can't fire us over this." "It was a misunderstanding. We can work this out." "A misunderstanding?" Marcus repeated. "You cornered my wife in my restaurant, humiliated her for your entertainment, and recorded it for social media. What part of that is a misunderstanding?" Brad tried a different approach. "Come on, Marcus. You know us. We've been here for years. We're like family. You can't destroy our lives over one stupid mistake. The word family seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. Family? He said. You think family treats each other the way you treated Diana? She's not family, Jake muttered, apparently forgetting that everyone could hear him. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Marcus stared at Jake for a long moment, and Diana could see her husband's face change as he fully understood, probably for the first time, what his wife had been dealing with. Get out, Marcus said quietly. Get your things from your lockers and get out of my restaurant. If you're still here in 10 minutes, I'm calling the police. You can't do this, Jennifer said, her voice rising toward panic. I need this job. I'm in school. My parents are going to kill me. You should have thought about that before you decided to assault my wife, Marcus replied. Assault? Brad said. It was just a drink. It's not like we hit her or anything. Diana spoke for the first time since the confrontations began. Throwing a liquid at someone without their consent is assault, she said calmly. And doing it while blocking their exit could be considered false imprisonment. I'm a healthcare worker. I know what constitutes assault. The three former employees looked at Diana with expressions that suggested they were finally beginning to understand the seriousness of what they had done. Up until this moment, they had been focused on trying to smooth things over and keep their jobs. Now they were starting to realize that their actions might have legal consequences beyond employment. Marcus pulled out his own phone. I'm setting a timer for 10 minutes, he announced. When it goes off, anyone still here is trespassing. Jennifer made one last desperate attempt. Marcus, please. I'm sorry. I know we were wrong. But Diana has been acting like she owns this place, telling us what to do, making suggestions about everything. We just got frustrated. Diana felt Marcus tense beside her, and she put her hand on his arm to stop him from saying something he might regret. Instead, she addressed Jennifer directly. I never told any of you what to do, Diana said. I made suggestions about community outreach because I care about this neighborhood, and I thought it might help the business. I asked about your classes because I was trying to be friendly. If my presence here made you uncomfortable, you could have talked to Marcus about it like adults. But instead, Marcus continued, you chose to handle your discomfort by humiliating someone who never did anything to deserve it. And you did it in my restaurant, on my time, while being paid with my money. The timer on Marcus's phone went off. Diana looked around the dining room and realized that Jennifer, Brad, and Jake were still standing there, apparently hoping that the deadline was some kind of bluff. Marcus pulled up his contacts and selected the number for the local police station. Wait, Jennifer said. We're going right now. The three of them hurried toward the back of the restaurant where their lockers were located. Diana could hear them grabbing their belongings and whispering urgently to each other, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage the situation. When they emerged from the back area carrying bags and jackets, Jennifer stopped near the door and looked at Marcus one more time. I really am sorry, she said. I know you probably don't believe me, but I never wanted to hurt anybody. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Jennifer, I believe you didn't want to hurt anybody, but you did hurt somebody. You hurt Diana, and you hurt me, and you hurt this business, and sorry doesn't fix that. After the three former employees left, Diana and Marcus stood alone in the empty restaurant. The lunch rush would start in less than an hour, and they were now short-staffed at the worst possible time, but somehow that seemed like the least important problem they were facing. Diana, Marcus said, turning to face his wife, I owe you an apology. A huge apology. You tried to tell me what was happening, and I didn't listen. I let my loyalty to my employees cloud my judgment, and I failed to protect you. Diana looked at her husband and saw something she had never seen before. Not just regret, but a fundamental shift in how he understood the world. Marcus had built his life around believing the best about people, and that worldview had just crashed into the reality of what people were capable of when they thought no one important was watching. Marcus, Diana said gently, you couldn't have known it would escalate this far. I didn't know it would escalate this far. But you knew something was wrong, Marcus replied. You tried to tell me, and I didn't take it seriously enough. I thought I was being fair by giving them the benefit of the doubt, but I wasn't being fair to you. Diana stepped closer to her husband and put her arms around him, not caring that she was still sticky with soda and probably smelling like a spilled drink. We'll figure this out, she said. We'll figure out how to move forward. But even as she said the words, Diana knew that what had happened today would change everything. Not just their staffing situation or their business operations, but their understanding of who they could trust and how the world worked when they weren't looking. The question now was what they would do with that knowledge and whether their marriage and their business could survive the process of rebuilding everything they thought they knew about the people around them. The immediate aftermath of firing 3 employees in the middle of a Tuesday was chaos that Marcus had never experienced in his years of running Marco's Pizza. Within an hour, he and Diana were facing the lunch rush with only Carlos in the kitchen and Maria, who had been called in early from her evening shift, handling the front of the house. But something unexpected happened as word spread through the neighborhood about what had occurred. Regular customers who heard fragments of the story began asking how they could help. Mrs. Patterson, who ordered takeout every Tuesday, offered to help wipe down tables. The college students who usually camped out with laptops volunteered to bus dishes and refill drinks. Carlos, who had been quietly observing the workplace dynamics for months, finally felt safe to speak up about what he had witnessed. "Marcus," he said during the brief lull between orders, "I need to tell you some things. What happened to Diana today, it didn't start today." Over the next several days, a fuller picture emerged of the toxic environment that Jennifer, Brad, and Jake had created when Marcus wasn't around. Carlos had seen them mock Diana's suggestions and make comments about her appearance. Maria had overheard conversations about how Diana didn't belong at the restaurant. Other part-time employees came forward with stories of feeling pressured to participate in the group's complaints about Diana or risk being ostracized themselves. Marcus realized that what he had interpreted as normal workplace camaraderie had actually been a culture of exclusion and harassment that he had been completely blind to. The recognition was devastating and educational in equal measure. But Diana's response surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of wanting to retreat from the restaurant or avoid the staff, she became more involved in the day-to-day operations. She started coming in during busy periods to help with tasks that didn't require special training, and she began building genuine relationships with the employees who had always been welcoming but had felt intimidated by the hostile group dynamic. "I refused to let them win," Diana told Marcus one evening as they cleaned the restaurant after closing. "They wanted to make me feel like I didn't belong here. Well, this is my husband's business, and it's part of my life. I'm not going to hide from that." The decision to press charges came after Diana discovered that Jake had posted the video of her being doused with soda to his social media accounts before Marcus fired them. The video had been shared dozens of times before Jake deleted it, and Diana began receiving messages from strangers making jokes about the incident. "It's one thing to humiliate me in person," Diana told the police officer who took her statement, "but sharing it online turns my worst moment into entertainment for people I've never met. That crosses a line." The legal case was more complex than Diana had anticipated. While throwing a drink at someone could technically be considered assault, prosecutors had to weigh whether the case was worth pursuing given the relatively minor physical harm involved. But the combination of the recorded evidence, the workplace harassment context, and the social media distribution made it a stronger case than typical bar fight scenarios. Jennifer, Brad, and Jake initially tried to minimize their actions through their families' lawyers. They characterized the incident as a workplace prank that went too far, and suggested that Diana was overreacting because she couldn't take a joke. This strategy backfired when the video evidence made it clear that the incident was targeted harassment rather than good-natured teasing. The breakthrough came when other former employees began contacting Diana's lawyer with their own stories. It turned out that the toxic behavior wasn't limited to treatment of Diana. It was part of a broader pattern of workplace bullying that had driven away several good employees over the past year. Marcus began to understand that his management style, while well-intentioned, had created an environment where problematic behavior could flourish unchecked. His desire to treat employees like family had made him reluctant to address conflicts directly, and his trust in his staff had prevented him from implementing oversight systems that might have caught the harassment earlier. The civil case was settled out of court 6 months later. Jennifer, Brad, and Jake each agreed to pay damages to Diana and to complete community service focused on workplace diversity and harassment prevention. More importantly for Diana, they were required to issue public apologies acknowledging that their behavior was motivated by racial bias and accepting full responsibility for their actions. Jennifer's apology was the most comprehensive. "I want to acknowledge that my treatment of Diana Chen Rodriguez was wrong, harmful, and rooted in racial prejudice that I need to confront in myself." Diana tried to build friendly relationships with the staff at Marco's Pizza, and I responded to her efforts with hostility because I was uncomfortable with having a black woman in what I saw as my workplace. I convinced myself that my feelings were justified, and I encouraged my coworkers to share my resentment. What we did to Diana was not a prank or a joke. It was assault motivated by racism, and I take full responsibility for my actions. But the real transformation happened at Marco's Pizza itself. Marcus completely restructured his management approach, implementing clear policies against harassment and discrimination. He brought in a consultant to provide diversity training for all staff, and he established regular check-ins with employees to address concerns before they could escalate. More significantly, he made Diana an official co-owner of the restaurant, giving her a formal role in decision-making rather than the informal influence she had tried to exercise before. "I should have done this from the beginning," Marcus told Diana as they signed the paperwork making her an equal partner in the business. "You're my wife, but you're also one of the smartest people I know about building community and treating people well. This place should benefit from that officially." Diana's first major initiative as co-owner was establishing a partnership with the community health clinic where she worked. Marcos began hosting monthly health screenings and information sessions, turning the restaurant into a genuine community gathering place, rather than just a place to eat. The incident also led to unexpected positive changes in the neighborhood. Other business owners, horrified by what had happened at Marcos, began examining their own workplace cultures and implementing policies to prevent similar situations. Diana found herself invited to speak at business association meetings about recognizing and addressing workplace harassment. But perhaps the most important outcome was the conversation it sparked between Marcus and Diana about race, privilege, and how good intentions aren't always enough to prevent harm. "I thought that because I loved you and because I tried to treat everyone fairly, that would be enough to protect you from discrimination," Marcus told Diana one evening as they walked through the neighborhood where they both now felt truly at home. "I didn't understand that I needed to actively work to recognize and address problems, not just hope they wouldn't happen." Diana took his hand as they passed the Thai restaurant where she had bought his lunch on the day everything changed. "Neither of us knew how bad it was," she said. "But we learned, and we did something about it when we found out. That's what matters." A year after the incident, Marco's Pizza had become one of the most successful restaurants in the neighborhood. Not just because of the food, but because of the genuine sense of community that Marcus and Diana had built together. Customers came not just to eat, but to attend the health clinics, the community meetings, and the cultural events that the restaurant now hosted regularly. Carlos had been promoted to head chef and was developing new recipes that reflected the neighborhood's diversity. Maria was enrolled in business classes with tuition support from the restaurant, working toward her goal of opening her own place someday. The new employees were younger and more diverse than the previous staff, and they had been hired specifically for their commitment to creating an inclusive environment. Jennifer, Brad, and Jake had all found other jobs, though their experience at Marco's followed them in ways they probably hadn't anticipated. Jennifer eventually transferred to a different college after word of the incident spread among her classmates. Brad moved to a different city to start over. Jake's parents required him to complete additional community service beyond what was mandated by the court. But Diana wasn't focused on what happened to them. She was focused on what she and Marcus had built together from the wreckage of that terrible Tuesday afternoon. "Do you ever regret fighting back?" Marcus asked her one day as they watched a group of nursing students from Diana's clinic sharing pizza and study materials at one of their tables. Diana considered the question seriously. The months following the incident had been stressful and emotionally draining. There had been legal meetings and difficult conversations, and moments of doubt about whether it was worth pursuing justice for what some people still insisted was just a prank. But then she looked around the restaurant they had transformed together. She saw Carlos teaching a new employee how to make the perfect pizza dough. She saw Maria confidently handling a complex order while switching between English and Spanish with bilingual customers. She saw customers of all ages and backgrounds sharing space comfortably, the way she had always imagined community should work. "No," Diana said finally, "I don't regret it at all. What happened to me was wrong, and it would have kept happening to other people if we hadn't stopped it. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." Marcus nodded and put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud of us." Diana smiled and leaned into her husband's embrace, watching the restaurant bustle with the energy of a place where people genuinely felt welcome and valued. "Me too," she said. "Me too." The story of what happened at Marco's Pizza that Tuesday afternoon became part of the neighborhood's history, told and retold as an example of what can happen when people refuse to accept discrimination and work together to build something better. But for Diana and Marcus, it was simpler than that. It was the story of how they learned that love isn't just about good intentions. It's about standing up for each other when standing up requires courage, and building something together that reflects the values they both believe in. And every time a new customer walked through the door of Marco's Pizza and was greeted with genuine warmth and respect, regardless of who they were or what they looked like, Diana knew that fighting back had been worth it. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. And sometimes the most powerful response to hatred is building something so beautiful and inclusive that it becomes impossible to ignore the difference between right and wrong. That was the legacy of the soda incident at Marco's Pizza, and it was a legacy that Diana Chin Rodriguez was proud to have helped create.